Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Nothing But Locks podcast. I'm your host, Ali Melnicki, accompanied by Jacob Schrader. How you doing today, Jacob?
Doing okay. Uh, I'm no longer in contention to win a fantasy football championship. It would have been back-to-back years. It would have been epic. But I'm happy for all my friends who are still competing, wishing them the best.
Yeah, I was in the same boat as you. I started strong. Dalvin Cook had a really nice Saturday for me. Nick Chubb, not so much. I had a great game from Zay Jones, but in the end, Zavonte Adams didn't do much. The rest of my team didn't really do much. So starting Zonovan Knight really did nothing for me. Got me all of 2 points where I had Latavius Murray on the bench that would have had me
Uh,
21. I was stupid and decided to start Justin Herbert, who only got 8 points. And Justin Fields, while it wasn't his best game, he still had a pretty good game. So in the end, it was just dumb mistakes, cost me. I overthought it as well. So what are you going to do
yeah,
next year?
I had one really dumb mistake too. I started Christian Watson, who to some degree was not benchable,
No,
but I'm a Rams fan and I had been watching the Rams game, and teams play the Rams differently than they play every other NFL team right now.
right.
They know the Rams can't score. All they do is run the ball. All they do is kill clock. In what world in a game against the Rams would the Packers need to throw a deep pass to Christian Watson? It never was going to happen.
Yeah.
Um, so I could have started Jerick McKinnon. I had him on my bench. I even started Kirk Cousins. I mean, Kirk Cousins had 78 points in my fantasy league. We play a little bit inflated scoring, but
Right.
that 50-yard touchdown or that 64-yard touchdown to your boy Dalvin Cook was like a 24-point play in my league. It's
Wow.
a 3-point bonus for 40-yard, and then 5-point bonus for 50-yard. Put him over some 300-yard yardage marker. All of our scoring is inflated, so it ends up being just about double. So I scored I think 189. My opponent scored 211. We like our scoring. Our scoring is really interesting.
Yeah.
And I think actually one thing to consider for all fantasy leagues is just adding more positions, adding a third receiver, adding a second flex. I think it adds a lot of fun and adds a lot of skill to the game. So I think it's something we'll explore in the offseason.
Totally agree. I'm all for different scoring formats. I do like 3 wide receivers in a flex over 2 wide receivers in a flex. So I agree with you. But, there's still daily fantasy to play this week. So if you are eliminated from your fantasy league and really don't have any interest in the consolation prize, like I'm not as interested in it, go and play some daily fantasy. You can get some Saturday games, obviously tonight, the Thursday game, and Sunday. There's 3 games on slate as well. But let's get straight into the stardom situms because there are people competing for a fantasy football championship and also people, like I just mentioned, doing daily fantasy. So we want to help you the best we get. And we'll start off with quarterbacks as we usually do. So my 3 stardoms this week are Gardner Minshew, Aaron Rodgers, Daniel Jones. I'm going to highlight Gardner Minshew because he's the one that's never been on this stardom list before. And here's the reason why. The Eagles are a great team, and as good as Jalen Hurts has been, he is helped by having the best offensive line in the league, one of the best receivers in AJ Brown, and one of the best young receivers in Devonta Smith. And you could even throw the tight end Dallas Goedert in the middle. I think if you throw Gardner Minshew or any serviceable quarterback in the Philadelphia Eagles situation, they're going to have a good game. This is not like starting, say, Sam Ellinger in the Colts lineup. This is starting Gardner Minshew, who has won some big games. Don't forget, he was the starter for the Jacksonville Jaguars a few seasons ago. Had they not traded, well, not that they traded, but had they not drafted Trevor Lawrence, he might still be there. He's one of the best backup quarterbacks in the game. He's going against a Dallas Cowboys squad who has just struggled mightily the last 2 weeks. They blew a big lead to the Jacksonville Jaguars last weekend. They lost 40-34 in overtime. They almost allowed the Houston Texans to beat them. I think Gardner Minshew is going to step in for the Eagles. I think it's going to be like nothing else happened. Maybe he doesn't have the mobility that Jalen Hurts does, but I see him throwing for several touchdowns. I think he's going to protect the ball. Like I said, he has the best offensive line in the game. So he's one of my top starts of the week. What about you, Jacob?
Yeah, I think that's a great pick. I'll say it'll be a big game for the wide receivers.
Yep.
And on the other side, I think it helps Dak a little bit too because there's not going to be 34 rushing attempts from the Eagles, right? It'll be a little bit slower game because they'll be passing it more. They'll stop the clock with incompletions. They'll get out of bounds. I think it alludes to actually being a higher scoring game. And I didn't realize it, but the Eagles are the top ranked offensive line by Pro Football Focus.
Yep.
And they really do. They have three elite players at the skill positions. Miles Sanders is a good back. It's going to be interesting to see, how, and this could really hurt Jalen Hurts in the MVP discussion. Gardner Minshew goes out and throws 4 touchdowns and 300 yards. That is basically a dagger to Hurts because him and Mahomes and maybe even Burrow are those three guys that are just a head and shoulders above and beyond in the QB MVP race. So could be interesting. My starts, I also have Gardner Minshew. I've got Geno Smith and I've got Dak. I think Dak puts up a lot of points because I think the Eagles put up a lot of points as well, right? I think they're, as you said, it's still a great offense. I think this is a big game for the Cowboys. I know I got a friend who's a Cowboys fan, and he was telling me he told his family, "Don't text me, don't call me. I'm going to be at a steakhouse watching the game." It was hilarious, and I told him, it kind of sucks that Hurts is out. He's like, I don't even care. I don't even care. But I think Dak fires back a little bit. Right, Dak's an elite player. He's got his boys back, and should be a great game.
Yeah, I'm a little leery about Dak Prescott because he has struggled as of late, and he's going against a top-notch Philadelphia offense, primarily the secondary. You still have James Bradbury there, Darius Slay. I think that he's very turnover prone, at least in recent weeks. So I'd be leery on him. But to go back to your point about Jalen Hurts and MVP, Robert and I had this discussion yesterday on the podcast when we were previewing our picks. If Gardner Minshew goes out and has even an above average game, and the Eagles win or the Eagles only lose by, say, like a field goal, that definitely does hurt Jalen Hurts' chances, no pun intended. But because look at this. Micah Parsons has been getting a lot of heat in the past few weeks because he went on radio about 2 weeks ago and said he didn't think Jalen Hurts is the MVP because his success is surrounded by the talent around him. That's not to say Jalen Hurts isn't good, but if you look at what Pat Mahomes is surrounded by, yes, he has Travis Kelce, but he just lost Tyreek Hill, one of the best wide receivers in the game, and he's still performing at an elite level. And the Kansas City defense is nowhere near the Philadelphia Eagles defense, and he's still finding ways for them to win. Same thing with Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow had to play about 4 to 6 weeks without Jamar Chase, and he got them on a winning streak during that time. He's had to play without Joe Mixon for a few games. So I agree with you. I think that hurts if the Philadelphia Eagles go out and dominate against the Cowboys, or at least keep it close and stay up to par. I think that's going to make him lose his chance at winning the MVP race. All right, let's move on to the sit-ems. So my 3 sit-ems that I want to highlight are Deshaun Watson, Andy Dalton, and Trevor Lawrence. And I'm going to center on both Deshaun Watson and Andy Dalton on this one because the Browns and the Saints are playing this weekend and Cleveland. And the weather is going to be one of the worst weathers you could ever play in if you are playing football. It is going to be not only freezing cold, but they're expecting something like 2 feet of snow. It's going to be windy. Gusts are going to be anywhere from 30 to 40 miles per hour. I don't know how points are going to get scored in the game. If you're into betting, if you look at the Vegas odds, the over-unders all the way down to 30 right now. That's unheard of for an NFL game to be down to 30. I don't think there's going to be scoring in this game at all. Even if there is, I think both teams are going to rely on their running backs. I don't know how you're going to throw in that kind of weather. So both of these guys are sits for me. How about you, Jacob?
Yeah, one thing I'll say is that the over under in that game is 32 points, and that's the lowest I think it's been in 16 years.
Yep.
Which tells you a lot. You probably don't want to start anybody on either of those teams.
No.
I think I speak for a lot of people when I say it's not the worst thing to see Deshaun struggling. It would be hilarious if he is a bust all of a sudden. I think he'll get it back because he was an electric playmaker in Houston, but I think he's one of 20 quarterbacks all time to not lead his team to a touchdown drive in his first 3 games.
Wow.
Yeah, he is. It's not clicking in Cleveland right now. I'll highlight Derek Carr because the Steelers have allowed less than 17 or less points in their last 4 games. The defense is really, clicking a little bit, but on the offensive side of the ball, they're doing okay. And Najee Harris is coming back to life, and that's important because in the Redskins Giants game, there was just no yardage put up because the teams ran the ball so efficiently, right? Brian Robinson against your Giants, he looked like the second coming of like the greatest running back of all time. I mean, he was dominant, right? I mean, you saw that.
Yep. Yep.
I think it's a similar game with a lot of runs, and I just think Carr is not going to put up a lot of fantasy numbers this game.
No, I agree with you. The Steelers do have a very good defense, and the Raiders are overrated. They haven't been winning in their games that they've won because of Derek Carr. It's been a lot of Josh Jacobs. It's been a lot of the defense. It's been a lot of the Patriots just making the worst decision they could have and throwing a backwards lateral. They're not going to do that against the Steelers, especially when you have TJ Watt in the defensive line. I think Derek Carr is going to get sacked. It's very hard to play in Pittsburgh. The weather is not going to be great. It's going to be cold. It's going to be windy. I agree with you. Derek Carr is not going to have a great game at all. All right, let's move on to running back. So my top 3 starts are Isaiah Pacheco, Najee Harris, and Deion Jackson. And I'll highlight Deion Jackson because he's filling in for Jonathan Taylor, who is out for the season. Sorry, Jonathan Taylor owners. I know you might not be in the fantasy football playoffs anymore if you drafted Taylor number 1, but, sucks for you. Anyway. Too bad. Like you wanted to take a shot. You could have listen to this is for Jonathan Taylor drafters. You could have drafted any single person in the entire American Football League, and you decided on Jonathan Taylor. I have no sympathy for you. You had any pick in the world. You could have took Josh Jacobs. You could have took Devontae Adams. You could have took AJ Brown, Tyreek Hill. You name it. You took Jonathan Taylor. Sorry, sucks to be you. Anyway, that was my little rant because I heard a lot from Jonathan Taylor owners over the past few weekends. But Deion Jackson has a very favorable matchup Monday night. They're going to have Nick Foles fill in for Matt Ryan, who has been benched again. I think they're going to rely heavy on the running game. If you also look, the Chargers have one of the worst run defenses in the league. They allow one of the top points to opposing running backs. I think Deion Jackson's going to get a lot of carries, especially with Nick Foles as quarterback. I think they're going to rely on the run game a lot more. I actually think this is going to be a high-scoring game. The Chargers don't have a good defense. They don't have a good defense. Indy is probably a little sour after blowing that big lead. I think they will rally around Nick Foles. He has that tendency to rally the troops. You look how he filled in for Carson Wentz a few seasons ago and won a Super Bowl with them. So I like Deion Jackson a lot this week. And I believe he's still available in some leagues if you can grab him real quick. How about you, Jacob?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the same matchup. And, after Taylor went out, I thought it was Zach Moss who saw a lot of action. I know Deion Jackson knows the system better, and he is the better pass catching back, to some degree.
Right.
But Zach Moss had 24 carries in that game, 3.5 yards a carry, so didn't play that well. But I think it could be a more interesting decision for Zach Moss versus Deion Jackson in that game. So I have Zach Moss as a starter. We'll see how it plays out because you don't really know, and it's unfortunate because it's like a potential league winner, one of the two guys, whoever's the starter. So if you can pick them both up, pick them up. It may not be the week to start either of them, or maybe it's the week to start both of them. I just think it'll get more clear after this week who really is the starter on that team. I've got Jerick McKinnon and Cam Akers as well. I thought Akers played pretty well against the Packers. I think if the Rams can get anything going, it's going to be through Cam Akers. So I think he's a reasonable start. I didn't start him last week. I have him on my bench. It wouldn't have mattered. And then Jerick McKinnon is on fire. So start him for sure.
Yeah, I like Isaiah Pacheco a little more. He seems to at least catch some more passes, but I think Jerick McKinnon is just as good of a start. If you have one or the other, they're both going to get carries. They're both going to get touches. The Kansas City Chiefs are going against the Seahawks this week. The spread's double digits. I expect Kansas City to win by double digits. The Seahawks won't have Tyler Lockett this week. Kenneth Walker's a little banged up. So I think that this game is going to be over pretty quickly. I think to spread time out, they're going to end up running the ball up. Both Pacheco and McKinnon are going to get the ball. I would say about split 50-50. So I think either of them are pretty good starts. All right, let's move on to who we like to sit. I'm going to sit the combination of Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson this week, along with Rex Burkhead, who let me down last weekend, and Deonta Foreman. And I'll highlight Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson because a lot of people might be scratching their heads. Well, they are going up this week against the San Francisco 49ers. And the San Francisco 49ers not only have the best defense in the league, but they have the best defense against the run in the league. If you remember a few weeks ago, they completely shut down Austin Eckler. They made Leonard Fournette and Rachaad White pretty much not get a lot of yards until the end when the game was pretty much out of hand. I think it's a similar situation here. I think it's going to be a low scoring game. So the 49ers are still going to have control of the ball the majority of the time. I think that Washington, if they want to score any points, are going to have to rely on the run. That's not to say that the run is going to be successful. You still have Nick Bosa over there. You still have that scary front seven for the 49ers. They're playing in Washington. They're also playing on a short week because they play Saturday. And the 49ers are coming off a Thursday game, so they have had more rest. I would say both Robinson and Gibson this week. How about you, Jacob?
Yeah, I think Robinson's going to be a really good player. I mean,
Yeah, he
I
will.
watched that Giants game, and he was dominant. I mean, he was the only good player on the Commanders.
Yeah, we don't have a good defense, so if he was the only good player against us, I can only imagine how Washington's going to do against the 49ers.
I was starting Brian Robinson, and that Terry McLaurin on the line, off the line penalty probably lost me my matchup because he would have gotten 7 points for that touchdown. And then he could have, in overtime, if he got 10 rushing yards, he would have hit the 100-yard rushing bonus, which in my league is another 4 points plus 2 for the yardage, or 3 for the yardage because he was at 89, would have been 7, 15, would have been close. Anyways, my sits are Dobbins, Tyler Algier, and then DeAndre Swift, actually.
Okay.
I think I think it's a Jamal Williams game because I think it's going to be a game where they score a lot of touchdowns. And I think, when they're in the red zone, it's Jamal Williams who's getting the ball.
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily say I'm confident enough to start either one of them. I think if you have someone who can perform better than Swift, who's consistent, Swift's been weird this year. He was drafted so early, and they literally split time evenly among 3 backs. I can't even remember the name of the third one. I think his number is 42. But they just split them all, and that's not a viable fantasy start. Swift could still have 4 catches, but he's not going to see a ton of work on the ground. I think he's a reasonable sit. It's a big decision. He's been sloping down kind of all year. But this is when you got to make the big time plays in the fantasy playoffs. So take a look at Swift, see if he's the guy you really want to put in there.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Going against the Panthers this week, it's kind of a similar game for the Lions against the Jets last week. And the Carolina Panthers have a very underrated defense. Jared Goff doesn't play that well in the cold. It was a low scoring game against the Jets 2017. I expect about the same against Carolina this week. I think that it's going to be hard to come by points. I think both defenses are going to play up to par. So I agree with you. I think DeAndre Swift is sadly becoming the number 2 back in Detroit. So I just wouldn't trust him. For some reason, Dan Campbell seems to have these games where he just doesn't want to put in DeAndre Swift in the game. And I don't understand it, but maybe we'll find out at the end of the season. All right, let's move on to wide receivers. So the 3 wide receivers I want to highlight are DJ Moore, Darius Slayton, and Demarcus Robinson. I'll highlight Demarcus Robinson because many people might be scratching their head. Who is he? Well, he's pretty much the only viable receiver right now on the Baltimore Ravens. It sounds like Lamar Jackson will play. If that's the case, he's going to be Lamar Jackson's top target along with Mark Andrews. The other receivers, if you look at the depth chart, are Deion Jackson, who's like 45 years old. Not really, but he's up there in age. And then they just signed Sammy Watkins, who was just cut by the Packers right before the game on Monday night. So if Lamar Jackson needs someone that he's going to throw to, if it's not Mark Andrews, it's going to be Demarcus Robinson. So keep looking at the news, because if Tyler Huntley is playing over Lamar Jackson, then I would be a little hesitant, even though he's going to be a top receiver. But definitely if Lamar Jackson gets a start, Demarcus Robinson is a must start for me. How about you, Jacob?
Yep. Can't lie. I did not know who Demarcus Robinson was before you let us know. So good to know. I've got Christian Watson, I've got Michael Pittman, and I've got Marquise Goodwin. I could highlight all three of these guys. I guess I'll go to Goodwin because Lockett is out, and
Right.
Goodwin has been surprisingly good this year. Like he's the third option on the team, but he catches a surprising amount of passes. Let's see some recent weeks. So in week 14 versus Carolina, he saw 6 targets for 5 receptions, 95 yards, and a touchdown. He's been putting up reasonable numbers all year. Um, had 2 for 10 on 5 targets last week. That was against San Francisco. As the number 2 wide receiver in this offense, I think he's incredibly trusted. I think he basically slides in for Tyler Lockett. He's similar build, small guy, fast. It could be a really big week for Marquise Goodwin. Teams are going to be doubling DK Metcalf. I think Seattle. Who is Seattle playing? Is Seattle playing the Rams?
Seattle has
No,
Kansas
they're
City.
playing Kansas City. So I mean that tells you everything. That's a great matchup for their wide receivers. Um, Marquise Goodwin to me is a sneaky good start this week.
Yeah, I was considering putting him, but I ran out of the top 3 people to put. But Marquise Goodwin, I agree with you. Don't forget, a few years ago, he was San Francisco's, I believe, 1 or 2 receiver for a while. He can catch the ball. I think he's been underutilized this year in Seattle. So I do think he's going to have a big game because Seattle's going to have to throw a lot. They're going to be behind. So agree with you right there. All right, my sit-ems this week are Christian Kirk, Amari Cooper, and Chris Olave. And just like with my quarterbacks, I will highlight Amari Cooper and Chris Olave. Obviously, Cooper's with the Browns. Olave is with the Saints. They're going to be playing in that ice bowl, blizzard, whatever you want to call it. But I don't see this being a big passing game whatsoever. Even if it is, there's definitely going to be no deep balls. I would just sit any wide receiver that it wears a Browns or a Saints jersey. So those are my top 2 sits. How about you, Jacob?
Yeah. So I've got Jacoby Myers. I've got Olave, and then I've got the Commanders wide receivers. And I'll highlight Jacoby Myers because everyone saw what he did at the end of the game last week. I don't know if he's necessarily in the doghouse, right? I think one of the biggest things I heard is A, he's an incredibly well respected player within that organization, and B, he handled himself incredibly well following that play. One of the biggest things, that they say is when you do something bad, don't go on social media. Right. We
Right.
saw what happened to Lamar Jackson earlier this year. We see Micah Parsons tweeting out stuff that, I don't think the stuff Micah Parsons is tweeting is necessarily wrong. It's just his opinion, but I think Jacoby Myers could struggle. Right, New England's playing Cincinnati; they've got a good defense. I think it's a reasonable week to sit him, and there's the intangible factor that he could just be in the doghouse. Right, this is still a Bill Belichickian run organization. Right, what he did last week is probably the worst play the Patriots have ran in 20 years, right? That's the most embarrassed Bill Belichick has ever been to be a coach to the New England Patriots in his career. So it could affect play calling, could affect how much he plays. So I think he's a reasonable sit this week.
Yeah, I agree with you. Obviously, that was the most talked about play following the weekend. I don't know. I know Bill Belichick tends to hold grudges. You saw him sit Malcolm Butler in the Super Bowl a few years ago, which was they might have won if he didn't sit. So I agree with you. He's probably in the doghouse for sure. All right, let's move on to tight ends. So my 3 tight ends I want to start are Cade Otton, Robert Tunyon, and Pat Fryermuth. And I'll highlight Cade Otton because the Buccaneers are going up against the Cardinals this week, who, if you haven't been paying attention to the news, the Cardinals are on their 3rd-string quarterback. Kyler Murray is obviously done for the season. Colt McCoy's not done for the season, but he's not playing this week. So they have to rely on Trace McSorley, who used to be Penn State's quarterback. If you saw at the end of that game last week that the Cardinals played against the Broncos, you saw how bad Trace McSorley is. So I don't think that there is any way that the Cardinals are going to be in the game. That said, that should that should allow the Bucks to score a lot of points. I don't think that the defense is going to be able to keep up because I think they're going to be on the field a lot. Tom Brady has seemed to lost touch with Mike Evans. I don't know what's been going on with him, but he does seem to have good rapport with Cade Otton. So for me, I think he's going to go to Cade Otton a lot. It also helps that the Arizona Cardinals defense has allowed the most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. So Cade Otton is the top start for tight end for me this week. How about you, Jacob?
Yeah. Um, I've got Dawson Knox, I got Darren Waller, and I've got Trey McBride. Um, Dawson Knox came alive last week. I understand he's got a tough matchup this week, but that's the Dawson Knox I think some people were expecting. And Buffalo they haven't necessarily struggled on offense, but I think they have realized that they need to get Dawson Knox more involved, right? I think Chicago's rank of being second against tight ends, it may be a little bit misleading, right? They're just a bad defense, and maybe they haven't played teams with great tight ends. Um, Sometimes when bad teams have really good stats against specific positions, it's a little bit misleading. So I think Dawson Knox is a good start. If you've had him this year, you've been waiting a long time for a game like last week. Far and away his best game of the season. I think he could bring it back. I think Buffalo could look his way a little bit more. So he's my tight end start of the week.
It's funny. He's one of my sits of the week just because I just feel like he's been so inconsistent. He had a huge game against the Dolphins last week. He goes up against the Bears defense. Actually, even though they've been terrible, they've been pretty good against opposing tight ends. So he's one of my sits. I also have David Njoku, which I'm not going to explain again, but he's a Brown. He's going to be on one of the worst surfaces this week in that snowstorm. I just don't expect very many passes at all. So I think he's a bench. And then Cole Kmet of the Bears. The Bills have one of the top defenses still, even though that Von Miller is out, and they guard very well against tight ends. So he's my other sit. How about you, Jacob?
Yeah. So I've got Greg Dulcich, Hayden Hurst, and Gerald Everett. Hayden Hurst coming back from an injury. If he starts, he could be limited, and I don't know. He to give him credit, he was really good in the games he's played this season, but you just don't know what his availability is going to be. And then I just got absolutely screwed by starting Dulcich last week. So, if Russ is back, that may change. He may be startable, but I would bet Russ is back. But even so, that's not an offense you want to be relying on if you're in the semifinals.
Yeah, I agree with you as well. All right, well, those are our starter sits. Let's go through our top scorers of the week. So for me, the quarterback I think is going to score the most points this week is Pat Mahomes. I mentioned they're going up against Seattle. Seattle hasn't been playing well at all. I believe they lost 4 of their last 5 games. They haven't been good since they went to Germany. Their defense hasn't looked good at all. In fact, they have a lot of key injuries. I think Mahomes is going to light it up against Seattle. They have a favorable matchup. I think Mahomes connects with Kelsey a lot. I think he connects with his wide receivers. So last week he threw something like 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions against the Texans. I don't think he's going to throw the same amount of interceptions this week, but he's one of my top starts. All right, and then my top scorer for running back will be Derrick Henry. If you saw the news, Ryan Tannehill is out for the season. That means Malik Willis is going to play. Malik Willis has not been that good in the few starts he's had this year. That being said, I think they're just going to pound the ball. The Titans are with Derrick Henry the same way they did against the Titans when Malik Willis started the other time earlier in the season. So I think Derrick Henry's in for 150 to 200 yard day, multiple touchdowns. He's going to be my top running back. And then my top scoring wide receiver, I'm going to do with Devontae Adams. Derek Carr is going to have to compete with the Steelers. It feels like every time Devontae Adams has a bad game, he comes back explosive. I know firsthand because I'm a Devontae Adams owner. He had a terrible game last week. He didn't get me a lot of points. One of the reasons I did not win my league. Well, I did not win my matchup, I should say, in the playoffs. So I think this week he's going to come back and have a monster game. Who are your top picks, Jacob?
Yeah. So, I'll just say something about Derrick Henry quick. I think the last 4 times he's played the Texans, he's gone over 200 yards in each of them.
Yeah.
Which is ludicrous. So I would have put him. but instead I went second. But going back to quarterback, I've got Dak. Um, I understand your sentiment. The Eagles, I mean, Dak is certainly a little bit of a sleeper pick here. Hasn't been so good. And the throwing a lot of interceptions, and the Eagles are a good defense, but I don't know. Dak is a guy who's they could put up 45 points any week. Um, and if the Eagles and Minshew put some pressure on him, I just think it could be a week for Dak. Um, Certainly a little bit of a sleeper pick, but it's Dak Prescott. He's an elite quarterback. He is he just any week could be Dak's week, and the Cowboys just go off in certain weeks. So that's my quarterback. My running back is Eckler, right? Eckler, surprisingly came out of the matchup last week with a little bit of an injury. Came back, I'm sure he's fine, but playing against Indy is just atrocious against running backs, first of all, and the defense has just taken a huge hit these last couple of weeks. Could be a huge week for Eckler. Maybe there's some light in saying that, hey, Herbert's been throwing a lot of interceptions. We want to keep the ball close to close to him and throw a lot to Eckler, more so than he's been doing. Not force the ball downfield and throw picks. So I think that could contribute. But just overall, it's a great matchup for Eckler. So that's my pick. And then at the wide receiver spot, I've got DK Metcalf. The Chiefs are gonna put up points, so the Seahawks are gonna have to follow. And as much as I love Marquise Goodwin, I'm not putting him above DK. I think he's still a solid start, but this is going to be a big week for DK, all things considered. So that's my pick.
All right. Well, that is our predictions for who's going to be the top scorers of Week 16. Let's go to our final segment, which is the start, bench, and cut segment. So I am going to give Jacob 3 players at each position. He's going to pick which of the following he wants to start for the rest of the season, which he wants to bench, and which he wants to cut. You ready for this, Jacob?
Yeah, what do you think about doing it instead of for the rest of the season this year, doing it for next year? Is that going to translate?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's say you have a dynasty league and you got to pick one of each. You want to do it that? All right, let's do that. All right, Jacob, you got for quarterbacks, Trevor Lawrence, Geno Smith, and Kirk Cousins. Who are you going to start, bench, or cut?
Okay, so dynasty. First of all, I love dynasty. I used to be in a big dynasty league. Should have never left in college because I was busy with baseball. But I think you got to take Trevor Lawrence as your starter in a dynasty league. I mean, the kid is showing up finally. I like my complaints about him was he was a little soft early in his career, but he's kind of taken that away. He's his press conferences look good. He's saying the right things. He's acting the right way. I like Trevor Lawrence. I think you got to bench Kirk and you got to cut Geno, just because you don't really know what's going on with Geno. I do think he has a career after this. I think he goes in and is a starter somewhere. It could be in Seattle, but I mean, the dude just made his first Pro Bowl in his 10th season. First off, good for him. Second off, it means his career is revitalized a bit. He'll get a contract after this. I like Geno, but he's my cut in this scenario.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I think I would definitely keep Trevor Lawrence. Geno, he's just one of those guys where I think this was his peak. He had his great season. I don't see him having the same season or even replicating it next year. Seattle's going to draft a quarterback for sure. They are rebuilding. They got a lot of draft picks from Denver. They're going to have one of the top picks because Denver is so bad. So I agree with you there. All right, let's go to running back, Jacob. So for a dynasty league, who would you, well, instead of start, we'll say keep. Who would you keep? Who would you bench? And who would you cut between Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon, and Najee Harris?
Yeah. So I think this is basically, I think it's obvious I'm going to cut Joe Mixon. I think the dude's at pretty much the end of his career.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was looking at drafts, past NFL drafts, and I swear I did not realize that Jeremy Hill and Joe Mixon were different players. I mean, they are exactly the same in terms of how they run. They're the same build. They're small, stout backs that, were in Cincinnati and kind of were always a disappointment in fantasy and then would randomly put up 80 points. So I'm cutting him. Between Najee and Aaron Jones, I think you got to keep Aaron Jones here. It would depend a little bit, on how old Aaron Jones is. I know Najee is incredibly young, but Aaron Jones is 28 here, so he was a 2017 draft pick. I guess I'll probably switch that then. I'll probably keep Najee and then bench Aaron Jones because Najee's got 4 years of more playing time than Aaron Jones, and a good quarterback in Pittsburgh completely changes the situation for him.
Yeah, I was high on Najee this year. He really let me down. I didn't have him on my team, but I followed him. But he has had a lot of good games as of late. I think that we're going to see more of his late season antics next year than his early season ones. I think that with Kenny Pickett, it looks like they have their quarterback for the immediate future coming up. He has had a good rookie campaign. I think Najee's settling in. I think he will have a better season next year than he had this year. So agree with you on all those. All right, finally, let's do wide receivers. How about these guys, Jacob? Garrett Wilson, Brandon Ayuk, and Gabe Davis.
Yeah, this is tough. Ayuk and Wilson are both extreme talents, both incredibly young. I
Yeah,
think you got to start. I think you got to keep or start Wilson because Wilson is just looking like a generational talent. Um, Running really, really good crossing routes and catches the ball well. That's important, right? He catches the ball well. He catches
right.
it well. He's moving, and he can make adjustments when the ball's deep in the air. Obviously, Ayuk can do the same stuff, but I have a feeling Ayuk's not going to leave San Fran, at least in the near future. Even after maybe his rookie deal is up, I think he might resign just because that team is so good. He has a reasonable role, but he's not in that role that's going to lead to crazy numbers. He's got Debo, and then you've got C-Mac, and you've got Kittle. So I don't know why I think he'll stay. I just do. I just think he's a good fit in San Francisco, and Gabe Davis is good, but he's a little bit off from those two. If Gabe Davis goes to a team that's not the Bills, I don't think he's a threat. So that's why I would cut Gabe Davis.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Garrett Wilson has a bright future ahead of him. The quarterback situation in New York's a little dicey. If Zach Wilson's ever going to come around or if Mike White is the real deal, but he definitely has a talent. So Ayuk is one of my keeps. All right. Well, that is our show, everyone, for today. I want to wish you all happy holidays, whether you celebrate Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa. I wish you a happy holiday season and a happy new year. Jacob and I will be back next week, even though the fantasy football championships will probably be over. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, there's still daily fantasy. So we want to help you with all your starts and sits. And before we sign off, Jacob, any last words or advice for the audience?
Hopefully you're in a better situation than I am. Hopefully you're still playing for the pride that comes with winning a fantasy football championship. And if you are, I wish you the best of luck.
All right, everyone. Take care.